Matt, what's up, man? So great to see you. And of course, honored to have you back on the podcast.
Honor is mine, man. It's been a while, dude. We were just talking the other day. It was 2 years ago in
That we
two
did a
years ago in
podcast together?
Mexico. No, it was 2 years ago in Mexico
Oh,
that I
in
actually see you.
Mexico.
And then it was April thereafter. But I think that was the last time I actually physically got to see you, man. It's gone really fast.
Yeah, it's amazing how quick time goes and everything changes and life happens. And it's pretty wild. I know we've stayed in touch, but man, to be able to have you back on the podcast, because I see the things that you're doing, especially with our young men. And I just can't help but think every time we talk, it's like this is needed more than it was 6 months ago. This is needed more than it was 2 years ago. This is needed more than it was 5 years ago. And the pace at which I think degeneracy is escalating is quite scary, actually.
It is, man. No, we feel that exact same thing. We see it culturally, and then we get the glimmer of hope. I always say hope is a horrible strategy, and that's never our strategy, but we see it, man. When we talk with these young guys and we see what they're doing, we see the need for it more and more, man. So no, honor's mine.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think? I mean, the crazy thing I hear, at least anecdotally, and I know you probably have more evidence, of course, to back this up, but one thing I often hear is that it's super difficult to find qualified people to work. That's the one that to me stands out more than anything. And I see it again anecdotally. You go into a store, you go into a restaurant, and the people are slower paced. The customer service has declined. The ability for communication has decreased. It's really sad when you look at young people, and it's not their fault. I think
That's
at,
right.
at an age, as they get older, obviously there's a greater level of responsibility, but as a young person, it's not really their fault that they're not getting what they need to thrive in this world. And we see it. And then we also see it in things like our dwindling military. Like up to 75% of children who could otherwise join the military cannot without a physical waiver because they can't complete the physical requirements, which is
Right.
crazy because everybody I knew when I was 18, every single person I knew
Yeah.
could pass that at a moment's notice without any sort of training at all.
Piece
It's
of
kind of
cake.
sad.
Yeah, piece of cake. And I think it's a multifaceted thing, but you're exactly right. We've lowered standards. We've lowered our standards as a society. So yeah, you're right. At a certain point, it's upon the young person to, take it on their shoulders and to maintain that standard for themselves. But what's happened is, man, we've lowered the standards as a culture. Parents have lowered the standards. Adults have lowered the standards. We like to say, it's kids these days. I promise you, if you raise the standard and you keep that consistent around them, they will rise to the occasion. We're seeing it over and over. And it's just those meta skills. It's what you're talking about. It's the factory settings of physical health. It's the factory settings of taking on personal responsibility, early. It's the factory settings of learning how to communicate. It's the factory settings of the small things. We're not seeing this because the world has advanced so much that we're not keeping up. It's the basics that we're losing, man. And I'm seeing it, I've seen it for years, even traveling and speaking and consulting and, working with these organizations. They're going, look, man, all these kids are coming up. They've got the grades. They've got all the, they're up to date. They're coding and all the things that school lays out. They've got all that, but they don't want to handle the responsibility. They can't communicate. They can't look somebody in the eye. They can't show up on time. Mom's calling during the interview to go, it's those kind of things, man. That's us lowering standards.
What do you say to somebody though who might suggest that, and you said they'll step up to the standard, but I think there's a
Mhm.
lot of people who believe that they won't. And then another concern that I have is, sure, I can raise the standard for my own children, but I can't raise the standard for the people around me. And
Yeah.
uh, there's a lot of kids who I know are struggling because they have poor examples in their house, or they don't even have a home at all, or they're in such a poverty type position that they can't
Right.
get what they need, let alone thinking about the future. That's a reality that we have to
It
deal with
is.
somehow.
It is a reality. And so you got two different things we were talking about there. So one, people believing that the young people won't step up to the standard. They won't if the leaders around them, if the adults around them aren't. That's the bigger thing. People that think the young people won't, it's usually because they're not holding themselves to that standard first.
Mm.
That's what I see over and over again, right? The parents that are most like, they're not going to do this is because the parents are inconsistent. The parents don't hold the standard. The parents are living, in mediocrity, and people that strive for greatness and people that strive for mediocrity don't usually get along. And so you got all these parents that are living in mediocrity and wondering why their kids aren't stepping up, right? It's the parent that won't. That second part, though, what you said is absolutely true. And this is the toughest thing, I think, for any parent, for any educator that really cares about young people, is that you can't impact and have that positive effect on everybody. You can't. There really is a divide. I really believe there's a divide that's taking place. I wish that wasn't the case. And we're trying to make, programs like ours or schools like ours or what, we're trying to make these things as accessible as humanly possible. But we still need really good people that are going into public schools and being that, because we just have such a lack of leadership overall. We do have a number of young heroes who are not going to be presented with the right kind of leadership. And it's creating a gap, man. It's a scary situation.
Yeah. I mean, I know you guys are doing your work to bridge the gap by bringing these schools. You said there's going to be 50 campuses, physical campuses for the Apogee program. Tell me what the Apogee program is, what that entails, because I know a lot of people who see, for example, problems with the public school system, but they haven't quite either convinced themselves or shown themselves there's a way for homeschooling or made that leap. Because I think those are on two opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But I think where you reside is somewhere in the middle. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, we're all about, home education is great. My kids are home educated right now because they've never gone to a campus that I didn't create. Right. So they went to school before, but it was schools that I created. They're home educated right now. And there are a lot of people who are in that middle of like, look, we don't want that traditional conveyor belt model. But we also don't want to, or feel like we can't, or maybe we really can't home educate. So we're coming together and meeting them in the middle. So the best way to describe what an Apogee campus looks like is it's a microcosm of life. What are the meta skills that are needed in life? Well, you need to understand how to communicate. You need to be able to take on, roles and responsibility early. You need to be able to collaborate with other people. You need physical health. So it's like all the things that you normally need as an adult. You and I would say, hey, this is a big part of our daily life. We try to make that a microcosm of the day for young people too. So they're engaging in Socratic conversations every day. We want our young people to understand how to think. We talk about critical thinking as a society. We don't talk about what that actually means. Critical thinking is the ability to think about your thinking. So we have the young people engaging with one another in Socratic fashion, Socratic dialogue. They learn to articulate. Matt will articulate what he believes and why he believes it. Then I'm going to listen to Ryan. Ryan's going to have a different perspective. And I need to genuinely listen to what Ryan says and engage in civil discourse by understanding the rules of engagement on a good conversation so that we can come to a conclusion of like, okay, Ryan put his best evidence out there. I put my best evidence out there. We might agree on some, we might disagree on some, and high five. That's okay. We can still be friends, right? We can still move forward. Civil discourse, something we still to do. So they engage in that every day. They engage in physical activity every day. Physical fitness is a non-negotiable. Tim's helping put together a lot of that program. Jason Kalipa is helping put together some of that program for us, campus wide, so that the kids are engaging. We talk about mental health for young people. Physical health is a precursor for their mental health. It's a non-negotiable that they're physically active. So they got a little bit of Socratic conversation time. There's a bucket for that physical education time. The academics still get hit, but we've got choice on what that looks like. You want to do a traditional math program? Great. Sounds good. We can do a traditional math program. Would you rather build out, do a little mini project where you're building out a mock business and you're running through P&Ls and kind of getting math covered that way? Great. Sounds good. You've got options for individualizing the academia, and then they're collaborating around real world projects. So they're collaborating around a 5 or 6 week project, whether that's starting a business, because again, that's transferable into the real world. Whether that is diving into the history of how to, create a coat of arms and how tribes form and how tribes come together. And so they meet around that and then build their own coat of arms, and they do a pitch, contest to one another for what the mascot should be at the campus or whatever that looks like. It's a real world project that really is transferable. And then it's topped off with responsibility on campus. Everybody has jobs on campus, and internships and apprenticeships off campus. Again, everything is transferable to real life, every bit.
So when I know when and I've gone through this and seen what you do, and I have a little bit more of a sneak peek and insight, but I think what a lot of people might be concerned with is the cost associated with something like this, right? So
Right.
you go to public school
Right.
and you often hear you get what you pay for. We are
Right.
paying for it. It doesn't feel like we are because we're not writing a check each month,
Right.
but
Right.
there's obviously going to be an enhanced cost associated with something like that. So how do you overcome those hurdles and objections?
Yeah, that's exactly, and I fully get that, and I always do it from two different things. I get we're raised culturally to believe, and when we almost plan on we're going to send our kids to school. So many people did, right? Like we're going to send our kids to school, so mom and dad are both going to be able to work. We're not
It's
going to
just
have to
what
worry
you
about.
do, right?
It's just what you do, right? It's the
Yeah.
norm. It's I call it the biggest religion in this country because everybody is just subscribed to it. For the most part, we're just going to send them off. And what I ask parents to start to think about, and again, there's a lot of presuppositions there. It presupposes that that's what a real education looks like. It presupposes that those schools are the same as when we grew up, and that there's no agendas playing out, and that's how human development works. And none of those things are true. But at some point, if you realize that's true, are you brave enough to figure out a way to break out of there? One of the things that will inherently stop people from even considering, am I brave enough to break out, is exactly what you said. It's the cost. The downside of any privatized educational opportunity is the fact that you got to pay for it. So we know that first and foremost. So we're doing everything we can to go against it. We're actually working on building out essentially an endowment fund for all of our schools. We're doing it in a couple of different ways. We've got two very specific foundations. So these are 501c3s that we have set up. One is the Apogee Strong Foundation, which is a private foundation that we are using to scholarship young heroes directly. So anybody that says, hey, I want to sponsor a young hero, or I just want this to go to like they can donate to that 501c3 tax write-off. Like people can help donate and scholarship a young person directly. We also have the Apogee Education Foundation. And so that is a public facing charity. We are able to connect to state grants that don't tie us to state, quote unquote standards or any kind of, it
Sure.
doesn't, we don't have to answer to anybody. That is for Tim and I both. That's important, right? Like we don't want to answer to anybody on this. We want to do what's right by the young people.
Yeah.
So the combination of those two, we're essentially building out an endowment fund. We have financial advisors on our side that are pro bono. They're in it for the mission. And we want to take those funds and make it to where this is accessible to anybody and everybody that's coming in and wanting to be, a character-driven human being. And we've created a payment processing system that also allows for people to scholarship without having to do anything. If they're business owners, they can transfer. They're using something like Stripe, or they're using, any other point of sale system. Well, they can switch over to Apogee Pays. It does nothing as far as their business goes. They don't lose any money. They're not actually, but just by nature of them doing business, it now creates a scholarship fund in their name. That little percentage that Stripe uses to now, perpetuate like a woke agenda or whatever you want to call it. Well, that percentage now goes back to the foundation that directly scholarships people too.
That's
So
cool. Yeah.
we're just trying to make it as accessible as possible, man, because that's always the downside. That's always the hardest part.
Yeah. It is challenging every time, my children are homeschooled. And so I realize that not everybody can be in that position, but I like that when you talk about presupposing that this is the way it's supposed to be, or that parents can't do it, or, we'll have to sacrifice. It's like, yeah, you'll have to sacrifice.
Bingo. Just like
You
you
might have to
sacrifice.
downsize.
That's right. You might have to downsize. You might have, I always tell parents, and again, some of it goes from not understanding what school is or where it actually came from, and some of the things that are actually going on, not understanding that it doesn't line up with human development. A lot of people don't understand that, and that's okay. You weren't taught that. But once you can go back to, again, the history of it and kind of take a look that it's not a microcosm of life, it's a microcosm of school, and that child development really wasn't taken into account. If you start to go down that rabbit hole, then you got to start talking about, where do I sacrifice? I tell parents, Like if you had planned on having kids and being like, you know what, man, for this is cool because the first, 18 years, there's going to be 2 meals a day that they're going to get for free. Like it's going to be 2 free meals. And that's just what I'm planning on right now. They're going to have 2 free meals. They come home at night and then I'm going to provide the meal. If at some point you learned that in every one of those free meals they're getting, there's just a tiny bit of poison that's in there, just a little bit of poison every meal, 2 meals a day for these first 18 years. If you learned that, you'd do anything in your power to be like, okay, I've got to figure this out. I got to sacrifice because I got to start now providing all of these meals. Right?
Right.
It's this thing, man. It really is. We're just poisoning them. There's a lot of mental poisoning going on, and we got to figure out how to sacrifice and pull them out. But we want to do our job to make it as accessible to everybody as possible.
Why do you think that the public school system is the way? Well, let me back up. Let's talk about some of the issues with public education, and then we can get into why is it that way? Because I think, and this is anecdotal, this is probably some confirmation bias. The people that I talk with, the parents that I talk with who have kids, the people who listen to this podcast, obviously we're a subgroup based on certain values, right? So it's not a great data pool to draw from if we're trying to look at it objectively. But everybody I talk to is like, yeah, there's a definite problem with the public school system. And so I'd like to know what you think those problems are, and then why these problems have been perpetuated the way that they have. Because I don't believe, for example, that school teachers are, not all of them are woke. Not all of them are trying to get our kids. Not all of them are trying to indoctrinate. Right. I don't even believe that about all administration. I think there's a lot of school boards. I think there's a lot of higher echelons of government positions and officials who love it as a mechanism of power. But I don't believe that the soldiers, so to speak, are the ones creating these problems.
No, the majority of people, and so anybody listening to this too, I want them to understand. And if we've got teachers and administrators that are listening, I want them to understand the majority of them are extraordinarily good human beings. Right. The majority of them really are. The majority of them really went into this because they genuinely love young people and they want to do right by those young people. So I'm the biggest supporters. And in fact, man, this system, the conveyor belt, the public school system, it's not going away. There's too much money, power, like it's not going away. That is a giant, massive monster of an infrastructure of an organization in our country. It's not leaving. So I want really good people there. There are young people who don't have fathers in the home. There are young people who have bad, mothers and fathers in the home. They have a rough situation at home, and the best adult human beings they ever see are those teachers and administrators at the school. So I want good people there, man. I very much do. So I'm a huge supporter of them. The system itself is not what I'm about. And some of the biggest issues, people tend to point towards agendas. They point towards critical race theory, and they point towards the sexualization of children, and they'll point towards some of the schools where you've got all the fights going down. You got all these kids filming it. You've got all the violence. Man, I agree. All of those things are a problem. The sneakiest, most egregious thing for me is the fact that it doesn't follow actual child development. Like it doesn't follow human development. It presupposes that we learn best by only sitting with our people of our own date of manufacture and listening to one other human being that has all the keys to the kingdom, that is going to just do something to me so that then I continue to grow, as opposed to give me the experiences I need to grow, as opposed to giving me responsibility and letting me fail. It says failure is a bad word. It doesn't take into account developmental stages of the brain jumps at 8, at 12, at 16, like none of that is taken into account. It is a systemic management of human behavior for 13 years in something that doesn't mimic what you do afterwards. Everything you do in life, it doesn't look systemically like what you are trained to do. Your baseline of normal is school. Go there, obey for 45 minutes, raise my hand, ask, permission to go to the bathroom. Somebody says yes, or somebody says no, got to be quiet. Don't talk unless you're spoken to. Here's what you have to quote unquote learn or regurgitate. Like none of that mimics how you learn in the real world. And that to me is the most egregious thing. It's a microcosm of school. It's not a microcosm of life.
So why is that the case? I mean, what I would think is you're saying that is that it's when you have a class of 40 kids, which I think is ridiculous, one teacher
Yeah.
to 40 children,
Yeah.
that it has to be managed as opposed to creating fostering an environment of learning and development and growth with some flexibility in there. But then also we're talking about this as such a large scale that there has to be systems and structures in place that you just have to march people through without consideration of what you're
Who they
talking
are.
about. Is this going to mimic the rest of life, who they are, what they have the aptitude for? Like
Right.
why should I have a child go through this preset agenda if they have an aptitude for technology or an aptitude for mechanics or an aptitude for mathematics or for the arts or whatever it might be?
That's exactly right. So it's behavior management for a large number of human beings with a very narrow definition of what education theoretically looks like. And we got to march every single person through that. We would not, what you're asking is it's a valid, logical question. When would we say everybody has to go to the exact same grocery store, shop down the exact same 5 aisles, and everybody has to eat the exact same food at the exact same time, and you have to wear the exact same clothes? Like we scream about how we want individuality for all these things, but the most formative years of our life, we put kids through this systemic management. And that's all it is. That's what it was designed for, was systemic behavior management of a population. That's literally what it was designed for. That is the Prussian military model, was designed for systemic behavioral management. And Rockefeller put his 1.3 billion into it and says, I want a nation of workers, not a nation of thinkers. And that's what we're creating, is a nation of consumers, not a nation of creators. There is, it's a system to stamp out all individuality and free thought. It doesn't mean that people can't come out of it and then still figure out how to be successful, but they're usually successful in spite of, not necessarily because of.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that with my own experience. I didn't have I liked my educational years. There are certain things I didn't want to like read or do a book report about, for example, but just typical stuff. But I remember
Sure.
getting into college, and there was an English teacher that wanted us to read a book and write a report. And I said, "Why are we doing this?" And I can't remember the answer she gave us so long ago, but it wasn't satisfactory to me.
Yeah.
So I left. I'm like, I'm out. I'm not doing that. And I
Yep.
lost my academic scholarship in half a semester and went to work. And
Yep.
I'm so grateful that I did, because I
Yeah,
can't
man.
imagine where I'd be a lawyer or an attorney or an engineer or something right now. Sure. But I don't know that I'd be fulfilled. And I'm not saying those can't be fulfilling careers. I'm saying for me, that wasn't something I was interested in.
Well, and that's the whole problem, is that we're not diving in and getting an idea of what these kids have an aptitude for or what they're interested in. Right? None of that is taken into account. That again is the problem of the whole thing. And again, what you just said is absolutely true. I enjoyed school too. I had a great time because I knew how to play the game really well. I knew how to make sure that I got along well with the teachers. I knew how to get A's without putting any work in, and I could spend all my time on girls and sports. Like that was it. So yeah, it was a great time. Had a great time. And then I graduated and went, shit, now what do I do? Now who am I? Dude, I've got nothing to offer the world. I guess I'll go to college because that's what everybody says you're supposed to do. Right. I got my straight A's, so that's easy. So I got into every college I applied to. I picked one because I had some buddies going there. I mean, there was no, I was like, all right, cool, man. So I'll go there. And I kept getting my straight A's without doing any work. And I got better at sports and I got better at girls. And then graduated from college and I went, sweet. Now what? Now I'm in debt. I'm really good at playing school and nobody cares because you're not going to go into the workforce and play school. They're going to expect you to be able to go in and communicate, contribute, right? Figure some things out, have a little bit of resilience. And I had gained those, but I hadn't gained those from school. I'd gained those because I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school. I gained those because I had been an athlete and I learned a lot of lessons from sports. I gained those because I made a lot of personal mistakes. I didn't gain any of those necessarily from the schooling itself. All I really, when I walked out of there, I went, shit, okay, I got a lot of debt now. But that's it. The skills were learned elsewhere. right? And then I had to relearn in my early 20s at that point who I was, or really learn it for the first time. Who am I? What am I good at? What do I like? What do I dislike? I didn't start even contemplating that until 22. What if we started having those conversations on a daily basis when they're 7, 8, 12, 14? They have opportunities to start businesses, to take on roles and responsibilities, to go, dive into internships, go dive into apprenticeships, go interview people that are in fields they think they want to go in. Again, it's not a panacea. If I was down here saying like, look, this is the only way and this is everyone, like this, you should run far, far away. There's no such thing as a panacea. But if you have those kinds of conversations consistently, and that's normal, you're given a foundation that's wildly different. It goes back to what we were saying earlier on, people don't think that the young people will rise to the occasion there. No, if you make those kind of meta skills normal, that is the baseline for normal. I promise you they will reach that. I was talking to Connor, Connor Boyack. We ever had it? Tuttle Twins?
I don't think so.
Okay. Do you know the Tuttle Twins books?
Yes, I know of them.
Okay. I can introduce you to Connor, man. Such a freaking brilliant dude. And I was talking with him about something, and it was hilarious, man. Like, my kids read the Tuttle Twins books. We have conversations around things like taxes, and we talk about those things normally. And so Brielle came into the kitchen one day and she's like, okay, let me understand this. She's 10 right now. I think she was 9 when she said this. And Connor and I were talking about it because it came from his book. She's like, hold on. So if the Fed can just print money anytime they want, all they do is decide they're going to print more and more money, why do people have to pay so much money in taxes? I don't understand why we're paying so much. And I'm like, that's a really good question. So let's talk about that. And I was just excited because it's a normal conversation in our house. They look at mom and dad have a business or have a couple of businesses, and mom and dad don't own anything. They're owned by these trusts, and the trusts move money over here. And here's the family cash flow sheet and our P&L. Like, it's a normal conversation for them. And so I posted something about that saying, man, I love it that my kids are asking these questions. And I had all kinds of people coming out of the woodworks going, that never happened. Kids don't ask questions like that, right? Mm-hmm. Kids never ask questions like that. Mine ask questions like that all the time because it's normal. It's the same reason my kids speak English. I speak English to them, around them all the time. They don't speak Chinese because we don't fricking speak Chinese. So they ask questions like this because these are common conversations. So it's like, what is the baseline for normal? And again, that's where school loses me, because the baseline for normal is listen to whoever claims to be the authority no matter what. The baseline for normal is I'm really primarily being influenced only by people that are my same age, and who knows what their backgrounds are, what kind of things they're facing at home that they're bringing to the table, right? I'm being influenced by a standard of be quiet, don't speak unless you're spoken to, ask permission for everything from the government agent. I'm not going to set that as the baseline for normal for 12 years for my kid and think that all of a sudden year 13, they're going to like switch their habits out now and then go to, an effective human. That's silly.
Right. Yeah, that, to use your analogy, that would be like they speak English for 12 years, and then when they get into college, everything's in Chinese. It's like, well, there might be a learning curve there.
There might be a big giant learning curve, and it's going to stress them out. It's going to, right? Like, they're going to feel like they can't do anything. So again, we're setting our kids up for failure. And then there's all the nuances of, sometimes agendas do get pushed in depending on where you are. And you got teachers unions pushing these things. Yeah, sometimes you do have, because the kids, because 5-year-old boys aren't designed to just sit there and listen to some boring commentary for 6 hours. Hey, by the way, I'm 44 and I know you're in your 40s, and like, we don't want to sit there and
I don't want to do that.
Hell no. A 5-year-old young man definitely doesn't want to do that. And then we go, he's got a methamphetamine deficiency, so we better get him all strung out right now so that he can focus, right? Like, yeah, there's a lot of these little things that pop in there too, man, that I just can't get on board with it.
I think one of the most frustrating things to me is that we've not only outsourced our children's education, but also now, even more so than I think in the past, their personal development. It's no longer about the the science and the math and the data and the learning how to learn the Socratic method, like you talked about. It's all the other agendas that we incorporate. And then a lot of parents, not all, but a lot of parents are happy to do that. It's like, oh, good, I don't need to do that. I wash my hands of that. And then they're not even if they're having dinner together, which they're not, but even if they do, they're not talking about that. They're not talking about what did your kids learn today, or what did you guys learn today? What went well, what didn't go well, what questions do you have? They're not doing that because it's so convenient. And I get it. It's so
Yep.
convenient
Yep.
to have somebody else do all that. But if you're going to do that, I don't think you maintain the right to complain that your kids aren't being educated correctly.
Bingo. Well, here's the deal. You are the primary educator for them, period. End of story, whether you're sending them away or not. Because they're going to see what you like. You're setting the baseline for normal at home too, right? So they're going to do what you do before they even do what you say. So who are you? Are you somebody who's pushing, education? What you said was personal development. And I love that, because we've got this weird thing culturally where we look at education and personal development as two different things. That's one and the same. The
Mm,
reason they're different is because one of them, we confuse school with education. School is a specific system and it's a specific religion. Personal development, growth, that is education. It's an infinite game that doesn't end if we're doing it right, right? But if those parents aren't doing that, they're not involved themselves, well, then that is the baseline of normal you're setting for your kids. You are the primary educator, period, end of story, whether you like it or not. You
yeah.
always will be. So you got to jump in on that.
One thing that I like the trend of, not necessarily K through 12, but I think college education we'll see a big change in college education over the next decade. And I hope it's one where it becomes less prevalent and less relevant in a young person's life, where employers are beginning not to look at college degrees, but their aptitude for whatever the job is that they're applying for, maybe past experience with other work and other internships and things that they've been doing. Do you see that changing? I think that's going to be hugely, hugely important moving forward. Not to mention, this is what will address the college debt crisis. And there is a problem with college debt. The way that we overcome it is not, quote unquote, forgiving or printing new money like your daughter
Yep.
suggested,
Yep.
but to eradicate the need for this type of schooling and make it less important, less relevant. Therefore, tuition prices reduce
That's
and
right.
and maybe even become non-existent.
That's right. Well, anybody listening, think about what I mean, because this is a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, right? Because they're coming out of that. Again, that's the emotional attachment to, but you need a college degree because that's what's going to make sure that, success happens, or whatever, the stuff that's provably false. If we logically take a look at it, we all know people who went to college and life is not okay. We know people that didn't go to college, life is great. And we know everybody in between. So college in and of itself is no guarantee of anything. And we all know that logically, but again, it's the emotional side. But think about like where you go. If you go, all right, man, I want to learn something right now, whatever it is, I want to move order of man into the next level of achievement. And so what I need to do is X. Do you automatically go, I got to find the local university and I got to find a course on that? No, you don't. That's not what you do. You're going to experts. You're going to you're figuring out, you're going to connections. You're going you're going to figure out how to do it, but almost guaranteed you're not going to go, I'm going to find a university course. But for our kids, for some reason, we're like, hey, let's go grab a whole bunch of university coursework to get a degree, because that's what's going to, people are starting to realize that more and more. But more importantly, what you said, employers are also recognizing that more and more. This is actually something that's been going on for years at this point. They're just now publicly talking about it. I had high school students who were simultaneously seniors in high school and working remote jobs that were degree required jobs,
Mm,
because we taught them how to get in front of those people. They showed that they had the skill set to take care of the job and that they could do the work, and they got hired. This is happening over and over and over. And a lot of companies are now being vocal about it. We have companies come to us every single week at this point. I had one, Nestle just came to us last week and just said, hey, here's this remote position. Because I know a guy who is one of the hiring managers for this specific division. And he
mm-hmm.
said, hey, this job says, 3 years experience, preferred degree, preferred. Man, do you have any good young men? Because I know the values that they bring. I know the work ethic they bring. Do you have any young men that might be interested in this position? Because I don't even want to put this out on Indeed. I'd rather go straight here. Like, we're seeing that over and over and over. And our universe, like, we're building an Apogee University that'll be, post this K through 12, but it's all going to be internship based, apprenticeship based. It's going to be real world experience working with these companies that we are working with, because more and more organizations are being vocal that they just want somebody that can do a good job, and they don't have to worry about the dramatic effect of, whatever this young person is dealing with. If they got a good character driven young person, they're ready to rock and roll.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So
my question is, how do you begin to find some of these students' aptitude? Because you say, they're going to be able to interview people that they're interested in interviewing. And I've done that actually a couple of times with some of your young men that have interviewed me, which it's always amazing when I talk with one of your young men, because it's, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And the questions they ask are extremely insightful and thoughtful questions. And I've never had an experience where I'm like, oh, he wasn't prepared or ready. It's always high level of respect, high level of preparation. But how do you find and articulate and foster a certain aptitude for whatever vein these students might want to travel when it comes to their learning?
You mean, how do you find that? So how do you find that as the educator?
Right, because there does need to be some guidance and direction, because if you leave them alone, I imagine it turns into Lord of the Flies, and then it's going to be chaos.
Yeah. So what you just mentioned, right? Your experience with these young men. So there are standards that we set, and then experiences that we offer. And that's how we take a look at it from an educational standpoint. It's how I take a look at it from a parenting standpoint, right? And I look at all these young men, and I look at everybody on our campuses as an extension of my family. Ultimately, what happens, right? Ultimately, as a parent, you want to have a really solid relationship with your kids. All of your kids are amazing human beings. They're freaking some of the coolest kids on the planet. And what I love is, one, there's obviously a very clear bond between them and you. Two, they're obviously very competent human beings too. I can see, if you're projecting in the future, my guess is those Mickler kids are going to go out and they're going to build lives that have purpose and have intent. And of course, there's going to be failures and struggles, and there's going to be all the things that humanity brings. But they're going to take on all of those things. They're going to build out a life, and they're going to be competent human beings while wanting to still have a relationship with dad. You don't want any of your kids living with you when they are 40 years old, right? You want them to be competent individuals. So it's the same thing here. So what we do is we set a standard and then experiences, because ultimately they need us less and less. Standards are what you're talking about. As an organization, we have our family contract. This is, as our family, here's how Beaudreau show up. As an organization, Apogee campuses, Apogee mentorship programs, here's how we show up. If you don't show up this way, then you're not invited to stick around, but you're going to have a ridiculous amount of respect. It is going to be yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. That's just how we're going to operate. And here's why. Here's what it is. And in fact, month one, I want you to start testing this, and you're going to document the change in all the people around you. I want you to see why we do this. I can tell you why we do it, but I want you to see why we do it. And so here's our standard. Physical health is a standard for us. You're going to be physically active. You're going to understand how nutrition plays a role in your mental ability and your ability to show up as the best version of you. So we're going to go through an experience that ties the standard in, right? And says, look, this is now a part of me. So we're going to set those standards up front. Once we have those meta skill standards, you're physically healthy, we've got manners and respect. That always matters. You are going to take on as much personal responsibility as humanly possible. We're going to take a look at your schedule and going to dive into time and energy management. Like, once we have these meta skills, you're going to learn to communicate and what that means to communicate effectively. Here are the rules of engagement on a good conversation so that you can keep your emotion out of it and you can focus on the rules of engagement. Those standards are now set. Now I want to give you an experience in this subject. I want to give you an experience in this category. I want to give you an experience in this category, and then get your feedback. You like it? You dislike it? There were things you were good at. There were things you were bad at. There were things you want to get better at. Like, it's that's how humans actually grow. So it's the same thing. Give standards, Once you have the standard set, then you go to the buffet of experiences to see what you like. So like our home education families right now are going through a computer science themed project. And it's so cool to see all the families go, yeah, my kid really loves this, or my kid really hates this. Cool. Both those are great. It's a great experience to understand. You love it or you hate it, but they all come at it with the same standards of what a good human is. And then they go through the experience and figure out who they are as that good human. It's really
Yeah.
actually simple.
Yeah, that's powerful. And not having an expectation. I think sometimes, and I did this with my kids early on, especially my older two, where I thought they had to follow in my footsteps and do exactly what I wanted them to do. And if they weren't doing it this way or interested in what I was interested in, something was wrong. But what I've learned, just because I've been doing it for a little while, is that the more that I can create opportunities and foster growth in something they're interested in, not only is it easier for me because I'm not having to struggle to go through something they don't want to go through, but I
Right.
can just see how much more of an aptitude they have for certain things versus others.
It's exactly right, man. And it gives you an opportunity at that point too to be co-curious. That's one of the things parents can really, it's something parents can implement like right away, is to be co-curious, to maintain, I think the sense of wonder and curiosity is a factory setting, and it is a God-given thing that we all have. We come out very curious, very like just in awe of the world around us, and we want to explore and we want to try things. And failure isn't something that, you look at a baby trying to walk, they're not worried about the fact they fell on their ass. Like they're going to keep going, man. They're not worried about the failure until the parent starts going, ooh, oh, don't fail. Don't mess this up. Don't do like, then they start going like, wait, what the hell? What am I doing? Something is wrong. My parent is obviously reacting. So like, it gives us the opportunity to get back into that childlike wonder with them and be co-curious with them when we're engaging with the things that they're interested in. We can maintain that. And if we maintain that for them, their sense of resilience and, work ethic around it goes through the roof. And I love what you said too. You were able to release expectations. I think parents conflate that a bunch too. And so do educators. Standards should always, there's a standard for everything. Standards are objective. Expectations are usually subjective. And that's where we can get into the resentment because an expectation wasn't met. But it's more of an emotional attachment there. Whereas if we just have a standard, right? That's why we parent the way we do. Beaudreau's have a standard of showing up this way. That's our standard. It's objective. So if you're not meeting the standard, I get to call you out on that. By the way, if dad doesn't meet the standard, you get to call me out on that.
Right.
Right. And that's it. So this is just how we do life. Whereas expectations, provide a little bit more subjectivity. And those are worth releasing.
Yeah. What is your thought then on grades? Like everybody's well aware of, the grading system, you get your report back and it's a C plus
Yeah.
and it's got all these marks and everything on it. Like, is that a good thing? Is that a requirement? Is it necessary in some way? Or how does that grading system work relative to the way we see the public school system?
I mean, the world grades you somehow. It
Sure.
just doesn't usually do it with an arbitrary measure, right? So if I'm bringing my product to the market, do people buy my product? Does somebody else have a similar product, but it gets purchased, to a greater degree? Why? I've got to reflect on that. The world is going to give you a grade. Your bank account can be seen as a grade. The relationships you have, if you have a solid relationship and negative, there is a grading aspect, but the school grades are essentially an arbitrary measurement of obedience, at least in the way it is set up. So if you obey to this level and you regurgitate to this level in some subjects, if you're I learned how to play the game of school, right? So in things like English and history, where there were some things that were essays, which were a little more subjective, I didn't care about the material. I cared about who's the teacher. Okay, well, this is Mr. Mickler's class. This is how Mr. Mickler lives his life. I can watch him. Here's what he likes. Here's what he dislikes. Here's what he thinks. He was very clear about what he thought as he taught this. He's very clear about the things he was against. So if I just essentially parrot back his own feelings to him, I'm going to get an A because this is really what they said, right? I learned that very early on. That's why I got straight A's all the time with no effort because I studied the people. So in that regard, and I could regurgitate what I need. I was like, okay, well, if they're giving us these multiple choice tests and here's how you do well on that. So I learned the system of that. So any of my A's were not indicative of a competency that was going to take me anywhere in life other than maybe being able to read human beings pretty well, right? But it didn't show any kind of mastery of any subject material. So I'm not a huge fan of the letter grades, particularly because of that. But life
Mm-hmm.
is always going to grade you. So that's one of the toughest things is go, okay, well, how do you measure competency in anything? Like
Right.
what is worth measuring, and how do you measure that? So do you measure it based on the subjectivity of, is this my best work? Do you measure it based on, well, here's a what's considered a world-class example of this, and here's how I stack up, and I did this a little better than last time? Those are the things worth wrestling with, because those are the ways that we measure things as we move into adulthood too. How do you measure anything that you measure in your life? You're taking those things into, nobody's giving you, hey, Ryan, you got an A on Order of Man this year.
Right.
What does that
Right.
even mean? What does that mean? You and Breck, your relationship, man, it was an A. It was an A this year. Okay. How do you define that? So yeah, it's a tougher thing, but at the school grades, that's really what it is measuring.
Yeah, I like that when you said it's a, what did you say, arbitrary measure of obedience. That's really
Yeah,
interesting. And I thought about this with my own kids. Like, I don't want them to be blindly obedient. I want them to respect certain
of
things. I want them to
course.
respect me as their father. I want them to respect uh the country, I want them to respect certain individuals. Maybe it's a head football coach or something like that.
Right.
But I don't want them just to blindly just have obedience towards every person. I want them to be able to say no. I want them to be
Right.
able to say, I don't agree with that. Like, those are things that are important for me to have them learn.
That's right. And I think most parents would say that and truly feel that. But then the irony is we throw them into a system that does not value that.
Yeah.
What have you? You've heard it asked, and when you were a student, I heard it asked, a million times, and I've had it asked of me when I was an educator, or when I was in the classroom as a teacher. Why do we have to do this? Because I said so. That's a
We just
shitty
do. Right.
That's a shitty answer. That sucks. If you can't really genuinely inspire them to understand what it's about, and we can't really bridge to the reality of it, then we're doing a disservice to them. And I was what I called creatively insubordinate as a teacher, because I had young guys who were freaking brilliant. I mean, some of my first schools, man, brilliant young people, growing up in gangland households, brilliant young people who are being told as soon as they get home, get out on the porch because you got a sling, and
Mm-hmm.
but they're brilliant. And so I'm mentoring them the best that I can to try to show them what kind of amazing opportunities they could have, and what kind of things they're going to have to overcome, and the gifts that they've got. But from a school perspective, well, this young man needs algebra and he needs to pass algebra. No, he doesn't. That's not what he needs right now. He doesn't need to pass algebra. He needs to not sell drugs when he gets home. He doesn't need to pass algebra. He needs to understand that he's got more value than having to go out there and participate when they're, talking about how they need to go jump this kid. No, you don't, man. You don't need to put yourself in that situation, right? And so, that's an extreme example, but it's also a microcosm of all of this. Doing the right thing is always the right thing, even if it's not the popular thing that everybody's doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Matt, you've got an uphill battle. I hope to be able to help you in some way, and just, man, seeing your young kids come and talk with me, and just seeing what you're doing, and it's powerful. Do us a favor. Let us know where we can connect. Excuse me, connect with you, learn more about what you're doing, and get all the information.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it greatly, man. And they always, I mean, like, there's a reason they continuously want to go to you for interviews and stuff too, man. So you do show up in a number of
Awesome.
powerful,
Yeah,
which
honored to be able to do it.
But best place right now, we're going to keep updating apogstrong.com. It's going to eventually show, we're going to show where all the schools are. We're going to link to the foundations if people want to get involved that way, but that's going to be the best place to go, man. And people can reach out to me directly, just at my name. Most active on Instagram. You can ping Tim too and tell him he's a monkey. He just doesn't get back as quickly as I do, but those are the best places to find us.
And for those who don't know, he's talking about Tim Kennedy as a partner in
Yeah.
what you guys are doing. I actually saw, this was months and months ago. I think I sent you a message. I was at the gym and saw you guys on, I think it was Fox and Friends maybe that I saw you on, or a Fox
Yeah,
morning
yeah,
show
yeah,
or
yeah.
something.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, sure.
And so it was pretty cool. I saw a couple of people there like listening intently to what you guys were talking about. So it's
That's
cool to
awesome, man.
see. It's inspiring,
It's
and I hope to help you how I can. Matt, appreciate you, brother. Thanks for joining me and talking about what you do. This is much needed in society.
honor's always mine, brother. Appreciate you.